Hey to all you Matthew studying peeps. This week, we're looking at the transfiguration. Matthew 17, 1 through 9, week 64. Wow. So, you notice in the previous chapter, it ends like 6 days later. I think the writer put that in there for a reason, and I kind of wanted us to emphasize that this week. Specifically, 6 days after last week, talking about Peter, it goes up to the transfiguration. And this is such an interesting passage. I don't know about you, but I've always liked transfiguration. That's just so, the whole thing is just kind of, it's out there. So, I just thought when I went to studying this, I thought, this is good to break this down for myself. Hopefully, I can do the same for you. So the word transfiguration means transformed. It's kind of an interesting word, don't you think? It's Greek. The same Greek word for transfiguration is where we get our word metamorphosis. And interesting enough, I'm going to get to that. It's in 2 Peter 1, 16 through 18, we're eyewitness to his majesty. Jesus is majestic in glory. It's where Jesus receives honor and glory. It's a huge event. It's a big deal. It's the same word, the same Greek word for metamorphosis is used for the eyewitness to his majesty. You ever heard that song in our Free Baptist hymnal? It's in there. It's kind of like a praise and worship song, so we don't sing it a lot. It's majesty, na na na, majesty. It's transformed. It's cool. It's Jesus' majestic glory. It's where he receives honor and glory. It's a huge event. It's a big deal. So let's not skim over it like I have done in the past. So why did the Lord go to all this trouble? And why Moses and Elijah? So I think, and this is what I concluded in my studies, and feel free to disagree, but the disciples were starting to understand he's the Messiah, but they needed a demonstration, and God gave them visual proof, a needed revelation. Sometimes we need reassurance. And he took Peter, James, and John up there. And how would you like to have been? I've thought about this. When he said, all right, I'm going up to the mount. I want you. Come with me. And they're like, or why didn't he? Or I wonder if they were saying, well, why didn't I get to go? Or the others that didn't get to go. Why didn't he pick me? I don't know. You ever wonder maybe what went on when he said, you, Peter, James, John, come on, let's go. So here they went, up to the mount. Anyway, why Moses and Elijah? Well, these two men represented a big deal to the Jews. Of course, Abraham did too. And a lot of people did. But Moses was the lawgiver. And the Jews referred to it as the law of Moses. Technically, it's the law of God. But that's what they referred to it as. The law of Moses. And Elijah, he's the prophet of all prophets. He's the greatest of all prophets. He's in no death. He's cool. He's a cool dude. So the Jews would not say, what does it say in the Bible? Instead, they would say, what does it say in the law and in the prophets? What do the prophets say? So that was their mentality. So these two were the human embodiment of the law and the prophets. And the guys that he took with him, Peter, James, and John, they knew who it was. There was no pics back then. That's what's kind of amazing me. They knew when they saw Jesus and Moses and Elijah, they knew who it was. Isn't that cool? Did you ever think about that? So let's look at verses 3 through 5. In Luke 9, 30 and 31, it tells us what is said on the Mount of Transfiguration. Moses and Elijah are discussing his upcoming death on the cross. And they're like saying, okay, you're gonna face death. You're gonna get glorified. You can do this. Don't be. And I don't know about you, but if I was having to do that, I might need some encouragement. Even because Jesus was just human, even though he never sinned. Peter, as he did not know what to say, offers to build for them. Good old Peter. In verse 5, God says, listen to him. God says, listen to him. Listen to Jesus. That is why Moses and Elijah, Jesus is the end all. The disciples kept stumbling over the coming of the Messiah. But God says, listen to him. This is my son, in whom I'm well pleased. It's cool. The disciples fell to the ground, and the very same Greek word that described what happened on the mountaintop that day is the same word to describe what happens to you and I when we come in contact with the living God. Our metamorphosis. That's that word I was going to tell you about, remember? The Greek verb for metamorphosis, transfigured, is the same Greek word used when we give our lives to Jesus. Romans 12:2. Okay? And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And and God says, this is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. Wow. But anyway, we still struggle even though we're transformed. Paul talks constantly about the battle going on within himself. And it's a gradual work. Two things I want you to remember. It's a gradual work, 2 Corinthians 3:18, being transformed. That's present tense. It's a gradual thing that we're always going to work on. How do we do that? Staying in his word, fellowshipping with other Christians, prayer time, and a gradual decision. Ephesians 4:22 through 24, where it says, put it off, put on new self. We choose. The enemy would love for you to think nothing will ever change in your life, but it will. Okay? I'm so glad we had this talk. Transfiguration. We are transfigured and transformed. We have a metamorphosis that goes on when we decide to let Jesus live in our heart. Amen. I think this was a good study. Interesting. Peter, in his mouth, bless his heart, he just can't. He just goes off. Just says whatever on his mind. He gets rebuked too sometimes, doesn't he? Oh, you gotta love Peter. And we're going to see him someday, and he's going to say, you kind of made fun of me just a little too much. All right. Cut him some slack this week. Y'all have a good week. I'll see y'all next week.